A few days ago, Deadline revised down their projection for the opening weekend for Dark Phoenix from $55 million to $36.5 million, a pretty catastrophic reduction down. Well, it didn't even get that. It got only $33 million for its opening weekend in the US domestic market. The $33 million makes it the worst opening weekend for an X-Men movie. The film that did have the previous worst until now was The Wolverine with $53 million, so quite a big gap between the $53 million which The Wolverine got and the only $33 million which Dark Phoenix has done in the US domestic market. Now, The Wolverine's a few years old now. These figures here don't include inflation. The previous film was X-Men Apocalypse, or I guess Deadpool 2 was the previous film, but X-Men Apocalypse has the same characters, so it is the direct sequel to this one. It was only a couple of years ago, and it got $65.7 million, which was really what they were targeting originally for this film. This film has a slightly bigger budget than X-Men Apocalypse. It has a $200 million budget right now, estimated for what Dark Phoenix was, which I believe might be the largest budget for any X-Men film, but it's certainly bigger than what X-Men Apocalypse's budget was, and it's nearly half of what X-Men Apocalypse got. Okay, so $65 million, it only got $33 million, so fairly catastrophic result in the US box office for Dark Phoenix. The $33 million was made up of $5 million from Thursday for the advanced screening. So on Thursday, it was unofficially the number one movie in the US domestic market. It did earn more money than Aladdin got on the equivalent Thursday. And on the Friday, it got $14 million, which includes the $5 million. So it got about $9 million actually on the Friday itself, which was the second biggest film there. Secret Life of Pets 2 got more money on its Friday than what Dark Phoenix got, but it did earn more money than Aladdin also without putting the advanced screening money on. So it is bigger than Aladdin was on the equivalent Friday itself. And on the Saturday, it only got $10.8 million, which is a really bad increase over the Friday. Now, here obviously looking at the total numbers, it says it's got a change of 23% down. That's including the advanced screening money from Friday. So if we take the advanced screening money out of Friday and just have Friday's actual totals, we have $9 million for Friday, and we've got $10.8 million here for Saturday. That's a really bad increase. It's a very slight increase. So that shows that it's already got some problems with the legs of the film after just one day after release, which is really what generally happens if you've got bad reviews, and that is what you've basically got for Dark Phoenix, some fairly bad official critics' reviews out there for the film. And for the Sunday, it had $8.2 million, which is a pretty good result compared to the Friday. So the Friday and Saturday are terrible, and the 8.2, that's not a good amount of money. I don't want to say that this is good news. The $33 million total is a terrible total for a film with a $200 million budget, and just for an X-Men franchise film, it should be getting a lot more money than this with the kind of X-Men name, if you like. But compared to the Friday, the Sunday hasn't collapsed. So the Friday number's bad, the Saturday number's bad, the Sunday number is still bad, but it's not as bad as it could have been, if you like. There hasn't been a collapse from the Saturday and from the Friday. But the Friday and Saturday are already, basically at a bad position. So perhaps word's already out that the film's not very good, or whatever the reason is. Dark Phoenix hasn't seen a lot of people seeing it on Friday and Saturday, but Sunday has got a fairly good result in line with the $33 million. So what that means is at this very early stage, without seeing Monday's box office, and more importantly next Friday's box office, it looks like it may have fairly good legs for where it's at right now. But again, where it's at right now is a bad spot. So it looks to me very early on, it's not going to collapse from here, but it's already in a bad position. So saying it's not going to collapse isn't necessarily good news, but it's a lot better news than perhaps we're looking at here for what it's going to get on the Sunday. And here are the films I had on my chart for the previous video I made before the Dark Phoenix official numbers are out for Friday. And we've got 4 films here that have a fairly similar opening weekend. We've got Ocean's 13, Ted 2, Hellboy 2, and Alien Covenant. And I've also put the Wolverine on here, which was the previous worst performing film, which is performing a lot better than Dark Phoenix. But Dark Phoenix, to make a profit, probably needs to be above this Wolverine line here, the dark blue line. But the main one to look for is the purple line here, the Alien Covenant line. Can Dark Phoenix earn more money than that? That's around about the film that had an equivalent opening weekend that had the worst end result. So is Dark Phoenix going to be able to at least sustain money and get something like Ocean's 13 here, the red line, or is it going to start collapsing in the box office after this already bad start and get something more like the purple line, or even go underneath where the purple line is? So the red line, I think, is still a possibility here for the way that the Sunday didn't really fall apart for Dark Phoenix. but who knows at this stage what will actually happen. It could perhaps go all the way underneath the purple line here. So is there any good news for Dark Phoenix? Well, if we look at the totals again, we have $33 million in the US market. Again, not good news. But it got $107 million for its opening internationally, which is a really good result compared to the 33. I believe they were hoping to get more than 107, so it's not as high as they were hoping internationally, but it is a good result, again, compared to the $33 million. So the total worldwide open of $140 million, that's pretty good compared to just $33 million in the US market. Now, if we look at the Wolverine's international money, it got $86 million in its opening weekend internationally, so that's a fair bit worse than $107 million, which we have here for Dark Phoenix. Now, the film is from 2013, and the international market wasn't quite what it is now in 2019, plus there's no inflation on here, but ignoring that, the $107 million, that's pretty good news compared to the $86 million which the Wolverine got. The Wolverine got $282 million internationally in total. And if you just look specifically at China, China only had an $18 million opening weekend for the Wolverine, so a very low amount of money for China. But again, it's in 2013 and there's no inflation on these figures here. And China only went on to make $40 million out of this $282 million for Wolverine. And if we look at X-Men Apocalypse, which is a much better film to compare it to, again, because it's only a couple of years old, so inflation's not really a big deal, and it is the same characters as this film has. This is basically the direct sequel to X-Men Apocalypse. X-Men Apocalypse got $100 million in its international opening weekend. So 107 here, a little bit better than $100 million. So that's fairly good news there. The actual US market number, again, not very good, nearly half of what this actually got, but it didn't get half of what this got internationally, got a little bit more. If we look at the Chinese open weekend for X-Men Apocalypse, it got nearly $60 million, so $59.58 million there, and it went on to get a total of $120 million from China, and a total of $388 million internationally. So it's not out of the realm of possibility to say that this is the kind of money that this film could be looking at internationally. Now, it's very early to make any real prediction as to what it'll get, but it has had a bigger opening weekend here, slightly, and this film went on to make $388 million internationally. It's possible that Dark Phoenix could perhaps go on to do quite well internationally compared to what it looks like it's going to do in the US market right now, and that is basically bomb out. The $107 million is the official number reported by Disney, or reported by Buena Vista, Disney's distribution company. There's no real breakdown yet as to where the $107 million came from, but we do have here the Chinese numbers from the weekend. This is the Sunday for China. It got $6.3 million for Dark Phoenix on Sunday, and that brought its total opening in China to $44.8 million. And you can also see here Godzilla was number 3 on Sunday with $5.5 million, and Aladdin was number 5 in China for Sunday with $1.6 million. So with these international figures, it's possible this film might not lose money. Now, I'm not predicting that at this stage. It's very early to even know what will happen with the film. But my previous video, just using the sort of deadline predictions, which were better than these numbers here, the $36.5 million instead of this $33 million, it was looking like it was possible for the film to lose hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe $200 million it could have perhaps lost. And that can still happen. There's no idea what will happen at the box office with the film right now, very early on. But the international numbers show that it's possible this film might actually not lose money. That's still a possibility right now. With a $200 million budget, or that's at least the number thrown around right now, you never really tell what the real budget will be, but with a $200 million production budget, generally speaking, add another 50% for what the advertising will be, another $100 million, but if we just add $50 million, which is probably a reasonable amount for this film, if we just say it was $50 million for advertising and marketing, you got $250 million that it has to get back to be profitable or to break even, and roughly speaking, it'll probably get about 60% of the money back from all of the international and domestic box offices. So it needs to get around about $416 million to get 60% of that back to get $250 million to break even. So it needs over $416 million to perhaps break even. And if we go with the more conventional number, if we say, okay, it needs 50% of its budget for marketing and advertising, that's $300 million it needs in total to break even. 60% of the tickets needed to get to $300 million is a $500 million worldwide total. So it needs somewhere roughly, probably between 420 and $500 million to break even. Somewhere in that range is probably reasonable. And if you look at this list here, this is the non-inflation adjusted worldwide totals for all of the X-Men movies. And we can see the Wolverine, number 7 there, $414 million. So that's roughly at the low end of what this film will need to break even. And X-Men Apocalypse, $543. That's a bit over the $500 million that this might actually need to break even. And that was really where I think the film was aimed at, or they were hoping at to begin with, to outdo, or at least to do the same as what X-Men Apocalypse did. It has the same sort of characters as that film. The film's only a couple of years older. It has a slightly bigger budget than X-Men Apocalypse. And that's what's looking at this stage very hard for it to do. But it's possible that it only needs around the sort of 420 mark, or again 414 here for the Wolverine, to actually break even. And if we just look at the US numbers, that looks very difficult to do, if not impossible. But because of the international numbers, that still may be a possibility. So the film could perhaps still earn more money than what the Wolverine earns, and that perhaps could mean that it doesn't actually lose money. Again, I'm saying perhaps here. I'm not saying it will earn more money than the Wolverine, but that's still a possibility because of the quite good international numbers compared to the very bad US domestic numbers that we have right now. So going forward, that means it's much more important to look at the international numbers for this movie than the US domestic numbers to see if it's going to actually make a profit or not, which is a bit of a pain because the international numbers don't really come out every day. They're not accurate. They normally get revised up or down. So just nowhere near the same as comparing US domestic numbers, which do come out on a daily basis. They're normally very accurate and they're fairly credible. They don't have a large amount of revisions usually associated with them. But that's what we'll need to do. Again, on Monday, we'll see what kind of drop-off it gets. There's a lot of holidays going on right now for in the US market. I don't think everywhere's on holiday yet, but I think quite a lot of the percentage of schools are. So the Monday should be better than a normal Monday drop. But we'll see how bad the Monday numbers are. And more importantly, we'll see how bad the Friday numbers are coming up. That'll let us know just how badly or how well it's actually going to sustain this $33 million opening weekend. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.